Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Flashback 64, the chronological Nintendo 64 podcast. I am Gooey, joined as always by McKenna.
Hello.
How's it going?
Good.
Yeah, I'm excited to, we're finally going to get into some specific hardware, I guess, for the console. We've never done anything quite like this, so it should be a fun time. And we are also joined, we have a special guest joining us. We have Marc Normandin. Hey, Marc.
That's me.
Thank you for joining us.
Of course. Thanks for having me on.
So I think we linked up a little bit ago on Blue Sky because I don't remember what exactly people were talking about at the time anymore, but people were talking about the N64 controller maybe. Not quite sure what the discourse was going on at the time, but you had shared a post you had made back around, I believe it was the 25th anniversary of the N64 in 2021.
Mm-hmm. In like September, I think. Yeah,
you had your article was called "The N64 Controller is Good," actually. And I guess it was do you want to tell people about your writing and the series this was a part of and everything?
Sure, yeah. So I have a newsletter, Retro XP, and I do theme months on occasion, and sometimes it's for an anniversary of something. Usually it's for an anniversary of something. Sometimes it's like the start of a company or the death of a company or a game series or a console. So the N64 one, obviously, is one of the console ones. So for the whole month, I did a series of essays on certain games for the console. I tried to stick with exclusives, but there were some cases where it was like the Command & Conquer N64 version deserves its own spotlight.
Sure.
Because it's impressive technically and everything, too. Like, it was ahead of the PC version, which is a weird, like, in the 90s.
That's kind of unheard of at the time, right?
It wasn't just like a port like the PlayStation one. It was like they redid it with full polygons and everything, and they used the expansion pack and all that. So getting into that and getting into, there's like the N64 is criticized for the things it didn't have sometimes instead of people talking about what it did have lots of. So
definitely.
There's a whole genre about this whole article about the genres that it just had a ton of, and like excellent representation and great games in it. Lots of focus on like what Rare did, and then also the controller, because the controller's a real point of contention. Then, now, well, probably less then, but definitely now. I feel like there's a lot of discussion of people kind of looking at it, and whereas 25 years ago you'd look at it and go, hey, that thing kind of looks like a spaceship. Now people are like, that thing looks like a spaceship. It's very different.
Yeah. Yeah, right. It depends on how you say it. That is something I kind of wondered about the controller itself. Is like, in my mind, it feels like something that the perception has kind of warped into, like, what it is now, as opposed to like how people traditionally really accepted the controller. I don't know. It sounds like you feel similarly.
Yeah, I think part of it is that. So controllers, it really used to be more of a Wild West thing. What is the form, like what's the form function of a controller was not fully established then. I mean, I feel like it was to a degree when you just had a D-pad and face buttons and you were, like there was a little period there where it's like, well, you might have 3 buttons, you might have 4, you might have 6, but like it was, the Saturn pad, the SNES pad, all those kind of looked similar-ish to a degree. But then you started to have to think about moving in 3D spaces, which changed the shape of the controller. It changed where your hands were going to be on the controller. It changed the kind of inputs that you both had and needed on a controller. Like the Jaguar came out touting 3D with absolutely no way to do anything like in 3D, right. Essentially. The original DualShock. Not the DualShock. What was the name of the original Sony pad? I can't remember.
Where it's just like the cross pad and the face buttons. Yeah.
But even then, the D-pad was separated so you could get some distinct kind of movement, and they added the second row of the shoulder buttons and triggers, and that stuff was used more to turn the camera back at that time. And games were developed differently too. Like Tomb Raider. Tomb Raider is 3D, it's polygons, but you're playing on a grid. All the movement happens in a grid. It's not this smooth.
We know that.
It's not this like smooth transition that you think of, like it was in the remakes they did for like the PS2, PS3. So the N64 comes in, and now it looks weird. It's like, oh, it has one analog stick. This is strange. It came in with one analog stick at a time when, the Saturn had their 3D control pad on the market for like 2 weeks, which was the first analog stick, and Sony hadn't quite figured out what they were doing yet. They made their like flight stick controller with the dual analog, but they didn't have actual dual analog sticks. And then even when they did, they didn't make games for it. Really, like Ape Escape, yes, but like there's a handful. N64 was built from the ground up for this, and everything felt natural for it, even if it seems weird now going back. If you're not used to that. But as far as an evolution from like what came before to the moment of the N64 controller, I think it's like a perfectly logical kind of line there.
Yeah, I can like see like what decisions they probably had to make to like get to where it came from. It isn't like people treat it like it's a how'd they think of this type thing. But there's quite a logic to it. And I never knew like if I was just like well, I guess I'm curious for you, Mark. Like, what is what's your personal history with the N64? Like, what were you doing at the time, and like, what did you think when it came out?
I don't know. I mean, I was pretty young, I guess.
Yeah. Okay.
I was like 10 when it came out. So
I was like 6 or 7, and so to me, like, it always coming up. Like it just like always made sense. Like you knew what game you were playing, like whether you were going to use the analog stick or the D-pad, and I never questioned it. And then it wasn't until more recent years where it became like really confusing to people. I don't know if they didn't come up with it or what it was, but it always just made sense to me as a kid.
Yeah, and even when Perfect Dark came out, it was 2000, right? So I was 14. That was before ever playing anything dual analog. And you still move the same way. You strafe with the C-pad and you move around, you tuck around, come around corners, just like you would with a right thumbstick.
Right.
And like, it's not quite as smooth as things are now, necessarily using that format. But I think of like, I don't know, trying to do that stuff on like the PS2 with the 2 sticks. It feels like garbage going back to it a lot of the time. It's just not. I don't think it's a very good controller. I don't think the sticks are very good. And like I don't know, there wasn't a dual stick Sony controller I really liked until the PlayStation 4s. And a lot of it had to do with the sticks. But I think it was just the systems that we played, and we were used to it, and you got used to it, and it was fine.
Yeah.
But it's all part of this, like, figuring out this eventual form. I don't know. There's not that much difference between any of the controllers now for the 3 major consoles. Like, the sticks might be offset or they might be, lined up, but, like, the basic idea, like, you pick it up and you know what the buttons do, even if you're not as familiar with that one. We're past that era of, like, hey, check this thing out.
Yeah, I would like for you, McKenna. Like you played, a little bit of. It was like one of the first consoles you played, but you haven't played a ton of Nintendo 64 games. So like going through on the show, like have you felt weird about it, or is there something you were surprised about it or anything?
I mean, it was my first controller.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I never had a chance to feel like it was weird. It was just like, oh, this is just the first thing I picked up. And I don't remember ever using the D-pad when I was a kid playing.
Yeah. I think Mark, you mentioned at one point in your post, like that the D-pad is sometimes underutilized for the console. I believe. I don't want to take your words out of context.
No, I mean the most popular control scheme on the system is the Mario 64 one.
Yeah.
It's like everyone saw that out of the gate and went, "Oh, okay, we'll just do that." Where like Nintendo was like, "No, we left you options. Like use use the different options." They're like, "No, this is fine. We'll just do that one thing over and over again."
Yeah, the games we've played so far, Mischief Makers is the one that really comes to mind that utilizes the D-pad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's one case where, actually, I think you could say about a handful of the games, like where they feel a bit more like tailor-made to that controller. Not to say they couldn't work on other consoles or whatever, but like Mark, you were saying, like a lot of the controllers' designs are so similar now that like I don't know, when I look back at certain, actually in your article you mentioned Sin and Punishment. Mm-hmm. And going back and like I was watching gameplay of it and I'm like, this, I mean, I'm sure it works on other stuff, but I was like, this makes perfect sense with that specific like control scheme of the game, which is, I guess, that Mischief Maker, like I think Treasure in general seems to have done a good job of like it playing to the strengths of that specific controller.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Treasure, I mean, they started with Gunstar Heroes, and basically, I mean, I know they did the Ronald McDonald game first, but they broke away from Konami so they could make Gunstar Heroes.
We loved it.
They wanted to do that on the Genesis because it was the only system they could do it on.
Right.
Because they said, like, with the amount of explosions and speed that they're going for, and the kind of the way they wanted to look and feel and move, they couldn't do that on the SNES. Which, like, they didn't have problems with the SNES necessarily. They had a lot of experience developing for it from their time with Konami, and they were just like, this game won't work on this hardware. We want to put it on the Genesis, and I think they did that pretty much everywhere. You know, they were like, well, this is the system that this makes sense for. So let's do it on this.
Because at the same time, around the same time as Mischief Makers, they had a Silhouette Mirage over on the PS1, and I've never played it, but it does make me think that, like, you know, that they had these almost concurrent games, but for completely different consoles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was on Saturn and PS1, and it's like, okay, those were, so the PlayStation 1 was just the most popular one, but like they think the Saturn one was the original, because I don't think Treasure made the PS1 version. I think it ended up being ported.
No kidding.
But okay. I think they wanted the sprite capabilities of the Saturn for what they were. You know, it's always like specific.
Yeah. It's probably a little bit easier now. I don't know. I don't know anything about this, but like now that there is a bit more standardization, I assume it's probably easier for a lot of people to come up with, you know, I guess how they should implement certain control things into their game. But I do like this idea of like them like really tailor making it and like kind of thinking outside of the box a little bit with like what they're given.
When you mentioned Sin and Punishment, like you can, you know, that the first time I played that was on the Wii and they had the you know, there were all the extra controllers for the Wii, so you could have the more traditional style kind of controller. Like, I played it and I beat it on that and I loved it, but it was a little awkward, you know, even because it wasn't designed for that kind of controller. And going back and actually playing it with an N64 controller at one point, it was like, oh, like I already love this game, but now it's like, now I fully understand this game. This is so much better. There's big stuff like that, but there's even little stuff like playing Star Fox 64. You know, playing that on the Wii or the Wii U, and it's like, okay, well, now I have to dodge. There's no C buttons. When I'm dodging out of the way, I have to dodge with the analog stick, and the analog sticks are not designed for the kind of precise, quick movement. Like, this was designed for a button press, like a quick double tap. Double tapping an analog stick is harder.
Yeah, you really felt that with because we were playing some on NSO, and I had just the N64 controller, and then you had to make do with the with your Joy-Cons and it was giving you a hard time.
Yeah, certain games aren't great to play on the Joy-Cons.
Yeah. That's another example. Like, I feel like just, I don't know. I feel most comfortable with the actual analog stick of the Nintendo 64. But yeah, I love Star Fox is a great example of like the C buttons, which I understand why maybe not every controller has the C buttons, but Mischief Makers is another one where, you know, using that for like your boost and like having those directional buttons actually like feels very, I don't know, very satisfying to have it control that way and very precise. I don't know. I'm fond of the C buttons.
What's funny about the C buttons too, because they're in their own little distinct, area there, or it seems like they are. They're not really considered, but it's just a 6-button face setup. Like it's the same setup,
right,
as the Saturn. It just so happens that they change the shape and color of those slightly so that you also know, oh, these are often like their own. They kind of can be used for their own thing. I love the color coordination is really a cool thing on that controller because it does give you this little visual in the different sizing for the buttons. So even though you've got this 6-button face thing, so you can use it like in Mischief Makers or whatever, you can use it just like it's a Saturn pad. It's this whole completely different. It can also be used for Ocarina of Time to hold different inventory buttons. It's like they're the same buttons, but there's no confusion in your brain because you're like, oh, this is an up, this is a left, this is a right, even though they're part of that 6-button.
That is big to me, actually, and I hadn't fully thought about it until just recently, where I had to do something where I had to play it. I was originally going to play it on... No, I was going to play it on N64 no matter what, but I think I had spent a lot of time in the past decade playing it on 3DS, Ocarina of Time, and then when I finally sat down and played it again on N64, and it felt like I felt weightless a little bit. Like, I don't know why. Something about me mentally, it like unclouded, and it just felt so comforting to play it on that controller, even though I had probably spent way more hours over the past decade total on it on the 3DS. But there's just something like more in my muscle memory about that controller or something like that.
Mm-hmm. You know the songs too.
Oh,
certain songs I'm like, oh, I know the C buttons that I have to press.
Oh, it's so unmemorable. Like when you have to remember like, oh, YLR, YL. It's like, what the hell is that? Like, where is Y? But like, write A down. I can always remember the Song of Time. I could recite to you all the songs still, but I could not tell you a single one. I know that's one on 3DS, but I don't remember which song. But yeah, those are like ingrained in me. That's
a great example. Just Ocarina of Time in general, like, so Mario 64 showed you how, like, that was Nintendo showing everyone how you can move around with the analog stick. And Ocarina of Time is essentially like, hey, check out Z targeting, because like nothing is as precise as we want it to be, and you're in this new weird 3D world. And isn't your big complaint about all these 3D games right now that like it's hard to look where you want to look? It's hard to go where you want to go.
That's kind of a thing with some of those earlier games. I feel like you've particularly had a hard time with. But that,
like playing since I played that for the first time, just starting the podcast. But I was used to the Ocarina of Time controls, and I went in and I would like just instinctively try to Z target things.
Yeah, Mario, that was happening. You're just like crouching a lot. Nintendo wasn't technically first. I know there's been a lot of like discourse lately about like overemphasizing parts of Nintendo's history and stuff like that, which I get, but I think oftentimes people, because like the way they did it became kind of like maybe not the first, but sometimes like the standard. Like Mario 64, I feel like kind of standardized certain aspects like you mentioned, and then Ocarina of Time. And I feel like that's kind of what ends up happening there, is like they kind of stand out because it was like the most, maybe not always, I don't know, maybe the best, but I think more so the more like notable thing for a lot of people.
I think that, it's like just because their reputation can be overblown in some places does not mean it's like not warranted in others
Mm.
as well. Uh, in the N64, like I know, it came in second, next to the PlayStation in that era, but I mean, the number of innovations or standardizations, like both combined, that happened during that era were huge for Nintendo. It was huge for the industry. Um, I mean, they were the ones. Like, yes, Sony added dual analog support, like late into the
Right.
life, like in the middle of the life cycle of the PlayStation, but there were barely any games that utilized it. And the Sega Saturn had the 3D control pad, but like the number of games that were required to use it is very, very limited. Like, yeah, Nights into Dreams or whatever, but there's just not a lot there. The only one of the systems that was really putting in hours and giving developers the time with this was the Nintendo 64.
Mm.
Um, Granted, it wasn't that many developers or whatever, but even being able to see like the projects other people are doing and like figuring out how to implement it in your future projects is helpful.
Just today, as we're recording this, a video came out that from the channel Dork's Delight, the Dork's Delight on YouTube, about the N64 controller. That was called "The N64's Controller Isn't That Bad," which I think it sets the bar a little bit lower than your article. But I was quoted like a snapshot of that from Blue Sky. I was quoted on there saying that it was fine, so I should have defended it more, I guess. But in that video, one thing that they pointed out, what basically what you just said, like the if you look at all its contemporaries, like they all the video refers to it as like a puberty phase. Like all these controllers from the time are kind of awkward and goofy and unique in their own ways, but I think maybe just it's that three prongs that the other ones slightly resemble modern controllers more. So I think maybe that's why Nintendo, the 64 kind of gets a little bit of the some of the garbage for the controller design of that generation.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, you look at them and they look weird. The Saturn pad looks like an upgraded Genesis pad, which at least is like a close cousin to a lot of what we see, now. And the N64 one is closer, but it's it looks like a spaceship. So like you have to squint.
I like
you
that.
need like an Enterprise looking N64 controller.
Yeah, we need an N64 pizza cutter to match our
Yeah.
Enterprise pizza cutter.
I think the Saturn's 3D control pad that's your Enterprise right there. That's the
The big round
the dish.
I love that. Yeah, that's one thing I hope to play some more Saturn games. I don't have I don't have a ton of experience with it, but now like seeing more, we kind of encounter more people, and just in that video seeing the controller and everything, I was like, I got to get my hands on one of these or something.
It's so good. It's so good. But I do think it also like highlights part of what we were talking about, like the Saturn has a lot of great games, but like the number of games that it has that could fully captured, moving around in a 3D world in like an efficient, effective way that kind of like you can see it now, you can see how it like directly led to the future of 3D games. It's limited. But even like the PlayStation's kind of, because like the inputs weren't there. But then you get something like Bulk Slash would have been amazing to play on the N64, but it's also amazing to play on the Saturn. It's just nobody played it because it only came out in Japan.
Yeah, I've never. I don't know that game.
Oh, it's great. It's a mech action game with much smoother action than you would think. A controller without an analog stick could produce. So
I think that speaks, like, I think that idea about like how the other consoles utilized 3D compared to N64, like it also can speak to, I think, kind of, you know, the one of the weaker aspects of the N64 is I feel like it does sort of miss out on like certain types of games that were maybe viewed as like an older style, like 2D style games. Like I feel like we don't see those, at least in our playthrough of it so far. We've only really seen like Mischief Makers. And I don't know, I think that's something that I think has been cool about, because I didn't really play much PlayStation at the time, is like, now that I've gone back and I've played some, it's like, oh, there's a lot of gems on here that I feel like, I don't know, maybe, I don't know if, I think Nintendo maybe should have embraced some of that style still.
Part of the issue just of the time was critics generally were dismissive of everything that was like not new and shiny in 3D. So this came out in a couple of different ways. So stuff like Mischief Makers was actually not beloved at the time. It was like, why are we doing this 2D? It's like, why are we doing this 2D nonsense when we could be doing 3D? And I mean, that game is awesome. It's got a cool art style. It's got, you know, amazing gameplay. It's super memorable. Like, but you'd even get like to go back to the Saturn when Layer Section released. There's all these reviews criticizing it and like, why did this have to come out on the Saturn? This is a sprite based shoot 'em up. Like this could have been done on the Genesis. And it's like, everyone who says stuff like that has like shown they have no understanding of the hardware or the impressive technology or like the ridiculous speeds that the Saturn's hardware allowed this game to run at. Like the amount of explosions, the speed that everything's moving at, the number of bullets on screen. So I think there were like some interesting kind of blinders going on there, where if it wasn't this big 3D new experience, I don't know, you know, Symphony of the Night was like a failure, basically.
Yeah, you know, that's the game I had basically in my mind. But yeah, that I guess I can see why at the time that would be something they pursued. So, you know, maybe it's just, I don't know, maybe I'm just imagining like a dream console scenario that would never happen, you know, but...
Well, it's not, I think this actually does give us a segue into something I do appreciate about the N64 controller, which is that it was designed very much to jump back and forth between these 3D experiences and more traditional like 2D ones and side-scrolling ones, which makes it very fitting for like the era that we're in now, where we're jumping between, you know, like, I don't know if you read the article recently at a Kamimi site about like retro being like a word to hate, essentially.
Yes, I did read that.
It's like, what's the difference? You know, if we're getting like PlayStation 1 throwback games that people are obsessed with and buying lots of in the present, and we've got a lot of, you know, stuff that's made to look like it's 32 bits or anything like that, and it's all coming out and it's brand new. It's like, well, it's all the same. If you're enjoying this game from 30 years ago and then another game from 3 months ago that looks like it's from 30 years ago, you know, we don't need this designation. Games are games. You know, good is good. So I don't know. The N64 controller fits that era, that idea so well of like being able to just jump back and forth between the two.
Yeah, I think that I feel like it's kind of we're also seeing, it's a thing that I've been holding out for a while, is I feel like this is, well, I don't know, maybe beyond there it'll keep going, but I feel like the PlayStation N64 like era is, because of it being this weird, people view it as kind of awkward sometimes, some of the transitions into 3D and stuff. So like people often, I don't know, we talk about it all the time where people look at an N64 game and they're like, this looks old and bad. But I feel like that's like one of the last generations where it's like people are starting to, you know, retroactively be like, oh no, this is a cool, like, unique style. And I don't know, I'm hoping we're getting to the point now where, like you said, where it's like that's just as normal as kind of how like the the 2D pixel art has kind of been renormalized, you know. Normalized low poly is what I'm trying to say.
I feel like we kind of ruined our brains for a little bit too with like thinking PlayStation games were ugly or N64 games were ugly because everyone started playing. They download a PlayStation Classic on their PlayStation 3 to play on their 54-inch HD TV.
Yeah.
And they're like, wow, this looks like garbage. Oh, can I swear on this podcast?
Yeah, you can.
Okay. My inclination is to do that, and I was just like, no, finish that sentence and then ask the question. N64 games, everyone's like, oh, this looks like, there's Vaseline all over the screen or whatever. And it's like, no, you're playing it at the wrong resolution on the wrong kind of television. Like, my N64 is hooked up to a lovely standard definition TV in the basement. It's like a 27-inch TV. It's hooked up to S-Video. It looks better than it's ever looked, even when I was playing it when I was a kid. Because my TV wasn't that good then, and my connection was worse. But when you're a kid, you're probably playing it on a bad setup. And now you're playing it on a different kind of bad setup. It's like if you play it on the hardware, the kind of hardware it was made for, you're going to see like, all of the stuff sings. It's beautiful.
We're playing it on a relatively bad setup, but even then it still looks pretty darn good, like compared to what most people are going for. So yeah, I definitely agree with that. Like, that was a perception I even slightly held for a while, like a while back, but it was more. I had a different thing where I think I was mainly playing. Like N64 games I was mainly playing this was like in like the Wii era where I played like Virtual Console, and like it looked like, especially on Wii U, like they actually looked I felt like they looked fairly decent, like the games, running on those consoles. But then anytime I ever saw like PlayStation footage, it was always it would be some old bad footage of it, not even good quality footage, and I would totally just have this assumption like looking at a Tomb Raider or something where I'm like, that game looks like dog shit basically. But now we've actually been playing the Tomb Raider games together, and I have a great I actually really like the art style and the look of the game. I don't know what my point is. I guess I'm saying like people, I think, kind of get these perceptions that they carry with them for a while, and I don't know. Even like something like Tomb Raider. Actually, this is kind of the opposite direction of appreciating the 3D elements of it, but I actually appreciate that game for its like grid based gameplay. Like I actually do really like that, and I think that's something, I don't know, that's why I like this generation of quote unquote of consoles a lot, is that like there are like Tomb Raider versus Mario 64 versus like Quake, that all came out within a few years of each other or whatever, like all have a completely different way you interact with like a 3D world, and I think that's what I love about it.
It is fascinating, and you think of like something like Quake, you're like, oh yeah, it's been doing 3D games forever, and it's like, no, they haven't. The other it's like Doom was fake. Doom is a 2D game in a first-person perspective, but it still gave them the experience to make something like Quake that actually was like fully 3D. Fully rendering in 3D, which kind of fits what we're talking about like these are your first, you called it the puberty era, of like getting used to this stuff.
But it did lead to some, like, actually there's a couple more. Can you think of some of our other unconventional controlling games we've had so far? I can think of a couple.
So there was Turok, which I ended up playing in the left-handed mode because it made more sense to me with like, I'm just used to a more modern control setup.
It was fairly close to a dual analog thing. It's I guess similar to Sin and Punishment in a way, even though I feel like Sin and Punishment looks more like you're moving, like you're not turning around or anything, but Turok, yeah, you move what with the D-pad, right, and you aim with the analog.
Now I'm like, is that how it was?
I'm pretty sure it was, right?
I don't.
All those first-person shooters had like 6 different control configurations, because I feel like to a degree they were like, listen, we don't know what's going to work for you. We don't know what's going to work for any of this. So here's a bunch of stuff. It was a Perfect Dark and GoldenEye that let you flip so that you could actually move. You would like use the C buttons as the which you would use for the D-pad, and you could use the D-pad to move like you would with the C buttons. It's like dual analog, but like in reverse from what we ended up going through as an industry.
It had all kinds of configurations.
It actually had dual analog in a way, because you could do
double up on the controllers.
2 controllers. Oh, yeah. So that was fairly forward thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah, all the first
pull that from like shoot 'em ups where you'd play as both joysticks at the same time on an arcade cabinet. Oh, there's a shoot 'em up on the Switch that I play that it has a leaderboard for that. Like specifically, like it will know if you're like doing 2 controllers as one person. You just like tell it you're doing that, and it has a separate online leaderboard just for if you are playing that style.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Yeah, I guess that would make sense, because it kind of is a different experience at that point.
Yeah,
it's different enough.
Oh, I can't remember which one. The developer makes they've released like a dozen of these things. It feels like in 5 years or whatever. So I can't remember which one it was.
Yeah, that's been one thing that we've had to like document, like all the first person shooters, like even ones that are like, a lot of them are like the Doom clones essentially that even play relatively similar, have completely different options for control schemes, and some let you remap certain things but not other things. And so like we've had sort of an experience between Doom, Hexen, GoldenEye, Duke Nukem, Turok. Those are the 5 that we've played so far, like that are like first person shooters, where it's like we're trying to find the one that has, it's like the Goldilocks zone a little bit, that like has either the best like controller layout or the best like capabilities to remap things, but then some of them you actually look up and down, and other ones like Doom are fake up and down. So it's like I had a better picture in my head when we started, like which I preferred, but I like most of them, but I'm having a hard time remembering which is the best.
Well, when you get to Perfect Dark, that's going to win anyway. So
when they added that, I played a little bit when they added it to NSO. Like it's one of my favorite games from being a kid, and it felt so. There's something so good about the N64 controller. Actually, with the shooters, one big thing that I don't know if this is that much of a thing to hype up, but I love it, is the Z button itself. We mentioned it for Z targeting, but it does really feel good as a trigger for like an FPS game compared to using a shoulder button or something. It really, I don't know, it might just be, again, the muscle memory, comfortable, well, you haven't played a lot of FPS games really, and I think you're with me on this, right?
Yeah, it just feels good to shoot with Z. It feels right. Feels natural.
Yeah, when it's like a shoulder button or A or something, it's just not quite right.
Yeah, there was a lot more of the like face buttons back then too. For shooting, I've been playing a lot of Resident Evil 4 again, like older style, and it was like, oh yeah, you have to like hold a trigger button or hold up a shoulder button and then press a face button to fire.
Yeah.
Or to reload, And it's like it's like a blending of where we've been and where we were going.
That was what, well, I don't know if we want to go off to Resident Evil. We've been McKenna's been playing it for the first time actually, and I think you're kind of experiencing that a little bit of like, you have to almost think about like, oh, I have to aim this first. Like,
yeah, I think it's started feeling more natural, but at the beginning I was like, I had to, I'd go to shoot or whatever, but still be trying to move around and just be aiming wildly, and then I'd have to remember I can't run while I'm aiming.
That is another interesting example, though, I think, of how old games are perceived, because depending on who you talk to, some people I know who are like classic RE fans are like, this ruined the series, it's too action based, it's too fast paced, whatever. And then other people you talk to, like, especially I remember there being certain posts like when the remake came out where it was like, that game doesn't hold up, it has tank controls, it's too slow, it needs to be updated. So it was a weird discourse, because I think depending on who you talk to, that game is either like really crazy fast. I mean, it's a little bit true in both categories, but I don't know.
I love me some tank controls.
Yeah, for me it's like the right it's the Goldilocks zone.
When you get used to them, and then you're like, I see it, I see the vision, I understand what's happening.
Right. I had that moment with a lot of these games we mentioned where where I didn't, it's one thing when you play it when you're a kid, I think, and you kind of just know it, but like there is something to like having that like click with you now when you're an adult, where you're like, oh, it all makes sense. We hit on most of the buttons, right? We talked about the stick. The stick, we've gone this long. We should probably address the stick is kind of like we all can admit that it's defected slightly, right?
Yeah,
maybe not defected, but
it's like I think in the article I wrote about how this is not like a Joy-Con drift issue where it's just like, or any the Switch gets a lot of like crap for that, but like all those PlayStation controllers drift so quickly or break completely or whatever. This is like
I had a PS4
issue.
Controller do that, yeah.
Yeah, it's a widespread issue. But back then it was like, well, we're just figuring out what stick works. Like no one. I don't like the original PlayStation ones didn't really drift, but I don't think they were very good sticks either, as in terms of like precision movement.
Yeah, am I crazy, or like is the N64 stick like control wise when it's not drifting like better than a lot of other ones, like, or is it just I'm usually thinking about this when we're playing, like we'll play Mario Kart on an N64 and then we'll play it on Switch, and I'm kind of a dummy, so I don't know how this works. Is it just that because they're slightly different, they can't emulate like the stick the exact same way on a Joy-Con, or is it that the N64 controller is just better? Because it's like night and day playing a game like Mario Kart or whatever on an actual control stick for N64.
It's a different input. I think of it as being like, okay. I know they're both analog sticks, but think of it in terms of like using an arcade joystick versus a D-pad. Like a 4-way arcade joystick is the same thing as a D-pad in terms of inputs, but it's going to feel a lot different. And the things you can do with it are going to feel a lot different. Playing a shoot 'em up with a D-pad is different than playing it with an arcade joystick.
Okay.
So the N64 analog stick, like yeah, it drifts or whatever because it's like that little attached to that little ball, and then that got loose, so the whole thing just starts to drift. But yeah, in terms of just like precision of movement and kind of the control over the movement that you have over a large area, I think the taller stick in that big range they made for it does allow for like a different feel of control than what you get with some other stuff. But obviously it doesn't hold up over time, that specific stick. I've got some third-party ones that are nice because the stick just goes into a bigger ball that's in the system instead of being like this separate piece hooked in. But I have an Atomic Purple controller that's 24 years old now, almost 24 years old. I'm lucky the stick isn't degraded.
That's nice.
I did not play Mario Party with that one. So my Mario Party controller has been long gone.
I did,
but I just want to know did you get the blisters and everything on your hand too? Because
I played a lot of them. I don't want to. This might sound like I might be sticking up for Nintendo a little too much here, but most of the ones I had issues with were like third part. They would be like the Mad Cats or something like that.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Whereas I think I might have had some sticks get wobbly, but it didn't. I don't know. Well, McKenna, you know, my Mario Kart spinning skills aren't very good for some reasons. I don't know why. It's not hard, but I can't do it. So maybe I just never had the actual juice to break the controller. I don't know. But that's another way where I feel like Nintendo kind of does themselves a disservice sometimes, because I don't know what the solution is, but they put Mario Kart on NSO and people go play it, and everyone I talked to was like, it's so hard to control, like it's so bad. And I've played it on both, and I can tell you, like, it's night and day, like, playing it. Mm-hmm. And so I'm like, I don't know what the solution is, but I think Nintendo should send everybody an N64 controller so they can actually play it right.
That's, I mean, I like emulating games plenty. I do it all the time. I'm I'm an original hardware guy through and through, but like, it's not feasible for everything. Yeah, totally. Except for N64 games. I'm not messing around. I'm like done with emulation. There's stuff I own on Virtual Console on the Wii or Wii U where I was like, nope, I'm going to buy the actual thing. Mm-hmm. I'm just not. I'm going to play it on the kind of screen it's supposed to be on, but more importantly, I'm going to play it on the kind of controller that's supposed to be played on. That Star Fox 64 thing was like, that's really what set me off, I feel like. Was like playing that on the Wii U, and I can't remember like what stage I was on, but I just paused the game and I start looking to see if there's like, is there an adapter so that I can use an N64 controller on my Wii U? And there is, and I got one. I ordered it from somewhere in Europe, and it came, like a month later or whatever, and I used it, and it's fine. But I'm like, this is just not having to like remap this thing so that it actually works on a Wii U, like through the Wii U's Virtual Console, because it's expecting inputs from a Wii U controller.
Oh,
and they don't all match up. So I'm like, I don't want to do this for every single game. And that's when I just was like, that's when I'm like, no, I'm gonna get an S-Video cable. I'm just gonna start getting everything on the N64, and then for the stuff that's like too pricey, now I have an EverDrive for the last bit of the stuff. Like that's the one system where I'm like, no, I'm playing it here because this is where the experience will be best. And
it really is. Like, I feel like some people think people just are saying that, but I genuinely think that's true. Like, maybe some other consoles you could get away with it, but I think there's a handful that it's like the original hardware is probably where you want to go.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot I'll do through my Steam Deck. There's, I have a bunch of the mini consoles. I really don't mind that stuff. I like a lot of stuff on Virtual Console just fine. The Super Nintendo games worked fine. The NES games worked fine. I'll play a lot of stuff on NSO, but I didn't even bother upgrading to the expansion pack NSO thing because I'm like, no, I have all these Genesis games already. Like one, I don't. Like, you're not going to get me there. Right. And I have all these N64 games, but I have them very intentionally, not through like collections and everything.
That's the one reason we'll suffer sometimes is that the NSO we'll play online with our friends and stuff, and it's a nice service for that. But we need to get another N64 controller, I guess. So
I was struggling playing GoldenEye with Joy-Cons.
Yeah, where we you could make it almost dual stick though, so that's
I think they got the like actual control setup good. It's just too sensitive.
It's not right.
Yeah,
it's not right.
I find that all the time with going back to PS2 stuff a lot of the time, even like the sticks both feel way too sensitive and nowhere near as sensitive as they need to, like depending on what you need to do, and it's just like nothing was figured out for years after. And they didn't get the balance back that like the N64 had for ages too. I mean, I think of the size of the D-pad on the GameCube controller. Like, the thing is an afterthought.
That's one of the worst D-pads of all time, if not the worst.
But it had been like phased out, like everyone was thinking like, well, 3D won, okay, no need for this 2D stuff anymore. So it kind of got shrunken, and the PlayStation didn't really have a D-pad to do that to. They had their broken up kind of button arrangement.
Right.
so it's only really in recent years where, Xbox like figured out how to make a D-pad that doesn't make me hate myself. And I mean, PlayStation's doing the same thing they're always doing, I guess. But like the D-pad on the Switch Pro controller feels good, like it's big and chunky again, finally, It's a nice D-pad.
True. Yeah, they brought it back, thankfully. I think we're at a good spot with the D-pad now. I feel like it's respected again. But the Z button is not respected anymore. This whole ZL thing, like that's the biggest garbage. I hate that.
I mean, I like the triggers fine. It is just funny that that's like what they ended up naming them, because they were like, well, we've got it's like we've got that letter. We're not using it.
I still say put triggers on both sides, like on the bottom underneath the stick, like it used to be.
The Steam Deck has a bunch of buttons that I don't really use on the back that I think you can map for stuff, but it's like around the side of the grips, and it does make me think. There's no center grip or whatever, but it does make me think that sometimes. I'm like, should I play a shooter like this sometime?
Yeah, I've had that thought before when I have had a controller like that, where I'm like, what? Like, oh, I could do something with this, but I probably won't.
It's like, then I have to map it in some way where I have to like create a file and a save for the mapping. I'm like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do any of that, and then I just play. Now I can relate to the people who don't want to figure out the N64 controller.
Yeah. Honestly, I feel like that's part of it too, and I think that's, I don't know. That's something I feel like I maybe did do with like I mentioned Tomb Raider before, where it was just like something I didn't have, so I was just like, I shouldn't care about this. And I think that has a lot to do with like what a lot of a lot of that Nintendo discourse lately is I think there are probably a lot of Nintendo fans. I don't want to upset any Nintendo fans, but who are just like, well, I don't want to learn anything else. Like, don't try to teach me anything else, please.
Okay,
I'm happy with what I know.
I do that all the time.
Okay.
It's like when I did the Nintendo Top 101 and I put Link to the Past at like 100. It was just like, all right,
that's rude.
I'm like, let's just start here so you know what you're getting into.
There's been too much in our lives. There's been too much disrespect for A Link to the Past lately.
It's a great game. It's a great game. My general argument, just to defend myself here, was that there were like 1,400 or 1,500 games or something, that qualify for this list. So we're talking about the top like 7% of what they've ever done. Or I'm not doing the math off the top of my head. It's a very small number. Like we're looking at, and it's like, do we really think 2D Zelda peaked in 1992? Or do it's like some really interesting things that happened, like maybe the next year when Link's Awakening was better, and then Capcom got a hold of it? Like there's a lot of 2D Zelda.
That's true, actually. Usually, though, the Link to the Past disparagement does not come to the benefit of Oracle of Ages. It's so, but
it did with me.
Yeah, I appreciate
me too.
With you too.
I like the Oracles.
Okay, we can
That's
all
great.
agree Oracle of Ages is better than. Actually, I might. Well, I don't want to.
I've already said it. It's out there. It's like in text and everything. People can see it. But that felt good at the start of that project, because I put that out there, and a bunch of people started yelling at me, and then they read it, and they were like, oh, okay, I see what you're doing. That's fine.
Yeah, in my mind, it's like once it's on, you've made your point. Once it's on the 100, right? And you like out of how many, like you might as well put it there.
Yeah, and I argued in that list and stuff too. It was just like, if you think a game should be 20 spots higher, like that's fine. We are talking about like fractions of percentages, in terms of difference here. So sure, that's cool.
Yeah. And ranking things, people can. You can take it
changes.
Take it with however, yeah.
Yeah, I hate half that list now, and I wrote it. So.
Yeah, don't get too worried about the rankings. Is always we have rankings on our show, but it's like hidden behind a paywall, and no one talks about it. So, and that's the way I want it to be.
That's the perfect way to do it.
It's just for our own amusement, I think, more so
there you go.
than anything. Yeah. I thought of one thing a little bit ago. It was one final thing about the two controller things, and it's just a weird like thing that bothers me. I don't know, but people will often be like, "You should get this. Check out this. It's the controller where they made it's an N64 controller, but it looks like a modern controller, and it's got the D-pad and the stick next to each other." And I'm like, why would I now if I want to play Turok, I got to put that controller away, like now I'm switching controllers to switch games. I'm like, it wasn't made to be like that. Like, why would I ever need that? I'm sorry to anybody who's ever suggested that to me, but I don't want one of those.
It happens every time I talk about the controller, and I'm like, I do not know how to make you understand that this is the opposite of what I want. Like, exactly, I am talking about how good this controller is for these specific games that it was designed for, and you are going, what if something had the N64 color scheme but looked like a different controller? I'm like, no, that's not what I want. The arrangement is all weird.
How are you going to play... Oh, there's that we played an F1 game where one of the options... You can play like a normal racer, but one of the options is steer with the D-pad, and you use the analog to accelerate like a gas pedal.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so you can. It's kind of difficult, but I feel like maybe once you get used to it, it could be cool.
Yeah, I think you can get used to it. I felt like I got used to it pretty quickly. Yeah, and it was fun.
And it is cool and unique, and it does make you feel like you're kind of applying pressure to it, and you can control it a little bit. Which maybe for that game, we could have stood to have more of that because it was a little difficult. But how are you going to do that when they're both next to each other on one stick? Doesn't make sense.
Yeah, stuff like that. It's Ridge Racer 64 is another one that's like, oh, use the D-pad if you want to instead of the analog stick, and it actually works better with the D-pad. To go back to like the arcade roots kind of thing, like Ridge Racer has that kind of, it's got its made up physics that are designed for that kind of movement with a D-pad, and I feel like it's like a finer amount of control over your turns. It's like with it's not exactly like Mario Kart, but you do stuff in a kart in Mario Kart that you could not do in an actual go-kart. And I don't mean like flinging shells. I just mean like the kind of movement where you're like you were doing things physics are not supposed to do. And Ridge Racer's got that going on too. I feel like you can do it with the D-pad, but if you move the D-pad to a weird place to emphasize like equal dual sticks, you're just messing with, like, now you have made it harder to play that game in its optimal way.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of what games would be good for that control. I've seen people say Smash, but like you just like taunt with the D-pad, I think, right? Like I don't think there's any.
Oh yeah.
Like, so normally when you want to taunt and Smash, you got to take your hand, but I feel like that should be part of it. Like a taunt is you're letting your guard down, right?
Smash.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you have to do that. Yeah, in like WrestleMania 2000, the analog stick is just for taunting and for the like activating your specials. You've got to have your hands on the D-pad the rest of the time to move around, to plan your moves, to like win your grapples and everything. So yeah, it's just like you said. You have to feel confident enough to take your hand off of the button that actually does useful things. Literally. So in that game, you can just tell a guy to suck it. Like,
you need to, you got to earn it, basically.
And then it's like, if they can come out of whatever they were in while you're taunting and hit you before you get your hand back to the controller, like, you get what you deserve.
Payday, Mitch. I'm proud of you. With this, you join the American workforce. A rare breed of determined and dedicated to quit.
Now $129.95 gets you an N64 and a second atomic purple color controller free.
So yeah, stop trying to fix the Nintendo 64 controller. Like that's, of the flaws you can point out in the console, I feel like it's not really one of them. Go sit down with a, proper looking display with the proper controller, play Ocarina of Time, and it's magical.
Such a good little system.
It is. It's nice. We like it here on this show. That's all about it. But
that's good. I mean, it would be a little awkward. Although I'm sure some people would enjoy it if it was just tearing it down at every step.
I have proposed the idea because Similar to like your opinion on a Link to the Past, which is not actually negative, but we have plenty of people who are friends of ours who we value their opinion and everything, and they just trash certain popular N64 games. There's a handful that I can think of games, but I always thought it would be fun because I don't take any of it really too. Even my favorite games are like Zelda. I wouldn't take it too personally if someone hated it. So I always thought it'd be fun to do like a haters episode for some games. Like I don't care. Maybe make us all like really look in the mirror and be like, do we really like this game? Like, can we withstand the haters?
You say that, like that. Then you invite me on for Mario Kart 64, and then your opinion of me changes. So
true. I've seen some discourse about this lately. Actually, that's not one
I'm not a fan.
Actually, I don't know. I don't really Mario Kart. Yeah, that's a case where it's probably like the worst Mario Kart. So what am I gonna say?
Yeah, that's the thing. I feel like people don't admit that is all. Like, I don't care. Like, you can have fun with it, or you had fun with it, or whatever. But I don't know. I was a big Super Mario Kart guy, so then I played Mario Kart 64, and I liked playing with 4 people. Like, that was cool. But I was like, the whole time, I'm just like, this is so slow. I want it to be fast, because like Super Mario Kart was fast. You know.
Did you do 150cc?
It's okay. Let's compare that to like F-Zero X. You know, we want to talk about like a fast racer.
Yeah,
it's like I wanted it to go.
That's fair.
Fast. So I like Ridge Racer 64 is like I am losing control. This is going so fast when you get like when you unlock the harder cars or whatever. But yeah, I don't know. I just apparently a speed demon as far as racing video games go. So
you like Extreme G?
Yes. I
Okay,
do.
cool. Just wanted to make sure.
I've got the Wipeout 64 somewhere down there too. I want to give that a shot and see how it compares.
Oh well, Mark, thank you for joining us on this episode.
Thanks for having me on.
I think some of those other games you mentioned down the line, like we'll have to get you back on to talk about some of them.
Do y'all do Bomberman Hero yet?
We're going to record very soon Bomberman 64.
Okay.
We have that, but no, Bomberman Hero. I'll have to add you. Actually, I don't know. Did you send me a list of games if you haven't already?
I think I probably already said that one because that's one I probably want to talk about. Like if like if you have me on, I'll talk about the sound hardware for the system too, because it's like this is one of the few games that actually took advantage of what the N64 could do with its audio.
Okay,
Cool.
That's cool. Yeah, I mean, that's been a theme with all our episodes, this episode included, where it's like, have people come on and like teach us things. Because as I've said many times, like I'm like trying to describe how something is, and I'm like, I have no idea how this actually works. So, which I think we mentioned earlier in the episode, I think a lot of people are similar, but they just like to imagine they know how it works. So I like to preface most of the things I say with, I'm a dumbass and I don't know how video games work.
There's plenty I don't know, but then I look up a lot.
Yes. Thank you so much for coming on. Is there anything else you wanted to promote, or I guess anything else you wanted to say too?
I mentioned we didn't get an hour into this without me mentioning where I write. Did we? No, I did at the beginning. Okay. Yeah, I have a newsletter, Retro XP. I regularly appear at Pace Magazine a couple times a month. And then I kind of freelance around when I get the chance. And I'm going to be in a few books this year, but I don't think I'm allowed to say what any of them are yet. Too early for that.
Well,
None of them are my book, so,
Cool. Well, yeah, thank you so much. And thanks to everyone for listening. And we will see you next week. Bye.
Bye.
And as always, we want to give a special shout out to our Millennium Star tier patrons. So thank you, Cyberlink420, Darren Hupke, Infection Form, Jeremy Aber, Kiefer, Nico Sylvian, Paul Quaid, and Underlined V. Thank you so much. And you can find our Patreon over at patreon.com/flashback64.